Scott Erickson, welcome.
Hi, nice to be
Hi.
with you.
You too. Um, you are a brave man having just dropped off one son at preschool. You've got three kids, and you're doing this gig solo because your wife is out of town.
Yeah, my wife's out of town, working with her business partner in Portland. I'm in Austin. I dropped my big kids at school, dropped my youngest at childcare for a few hours to do some work. So I'm at a coffee shop here in Austin, just working away. Yep.
You have some sort of an Austin bird that we don't have here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, there's many kind of like jungle-like birds. When we moved here, we were like, what is happening? Yeah, there's a lot of caca, caca. It's very exciting. It's very tropical. That's the thing about Austin is it's like Texas hill country, but tropical too. Yeah, it's got a little like tropical vibe.
Are
So
you
just
from,
imagine you're on like the jungle cruise.
and you'll be our tour guide. Are you from the Pacific Northwest?
I am. I grew up in Seattle. I grew up in the town Mukilteo, just north of Seattle. Ferry boat to Woodbury Island. Went to college at Western Washington University, and then I lived in Queen Anne and Green Lake and Montlake for years before kind of moved some other places, but was married in Seattle and all those good things. So yeah.
Well, everyone watching this right now is envious of your blue sky in the background. And I think you're even faking us out. I don't even think you need that coat.
In the sun you don't, but in the shade you do. Yeah, it's almost there. It's gonna be like 80 today, but yeah, it's cold right now.
Well, we are so excited about this new book that you've released into the world. For someone that's not necessarily familiar with your art, you're multi-talented. You paint, you had a one-man show. Now you have this book, which is called Honest Advent, which is sort of where I want to begin. Thank you, because
There we go.
I didn't get my media copy, so I didn't even plan that. Just keep holding it.
There we go. I'll just hold it up the whole time. We'll show it later, but ask your question. Yes, Honest Advent. There we go.
The byline says, awakening to the wonder of God with us. And I think part of the premise here is that the nativity scene that a lot of us are putting up is not something that happened a long time ago that we're remembering, but you're proposing that it's Jesus with us right here, right now.
Exactly. I'm to make a living as an artist, you do lots of things. So yes, I'm an illustrator, a painter, an author, a public speaker. I'm also a spiritual director, and I speak at a lot of different things. One of my main teaching influences, and really like at the core of kind of my own spiritual life, is that the only reason we tell any of these stories from the Bible still is because they didn't just happen back then, but they're happening right now. Like if they weren't about now, we wouldn't tell these stories to one another. And so I think all those of you who are here, like we've encountered a living God in our lives, and that is mysterious and unknown at times, but we keep engaging with it, and we're looking for God in the midst of our lives. I actually think our deepest question isn't, do we think God exists or not? I think our deepest question, every human being, is God in the midst of all of this, like my life, in the mundaneness of life, which is really the question is God good? And that is the question we're always looking for the answer to. About 4 years ago, we found ourselves in kind of a similar spot. It was like at the end of an exhausting election cycle. We were seeing footage from Syria and all this destruction and devastation. We had multiple mass shootings, Zika, Flint water crisis, all of these things. And I found myself walking into a retail store. I think it was a Target in mid-November, and everything was covered in, the dusting of Christmas decorations had descended upon Western society. And I just remember having this deep feeling. And I'm a big fan of Christmas. I'm one of those nerds who turns on the Christmas music 24 hours when it comes the day after Thanksgiving. I speed dial it on my car, I listen to it. But this particular Christmas, I just was like, all of this feels so irrelevant to the world I find myself in. It feels like it's not even about a human story. And not even like the Santa stuff, but even like the Christian tradition, like the imagery from my own tradition. Like it seems like it's a story that's it had become so safe and sanitized that it just felt like it wasn't even about real people anymore. And my, as a Christ follower, my deepest question to Christ was, are you still in the midst of our lives? Are you still coming in the midst of our lives? I know, and really the question is Christmas a memorial service or is it a birthday party? A memorial service means like, oh, remember when that happened long ago? That was cool. But a birthday party means it's still going on today. And if you go to any church and you ask the kids, hey, whose birthday is Christmas? They're like, it's Jesus' birthday. So we infer that it's a birthday party, meaning it's still going on. And then that led me to go, well, how is it still going on? Where are you coming in the midst? And I say this in the book, I'm not a woman, but I'm married to one. And I've witnessed up close 3 pregnancies and birth. And I have witnessed that that human beings come into the world through vulnerability, like in a vulnerable way, in weakness, and it's all mysterious and wonderful and crazy. And if we celebrate Christmas, the story is that the divine, the holy mystery, the God that we know and love, that God incarnated through that exact same avenue, which is human vulnerability. Like in a way that, like the invisible God, when he decided to make himself visible, he started the conversation with humanity saying, I'm gonna need you to take care of me for a really long time. That's how he started the conversation with us. And so what would it mean to start that conversation with God through our own vulnerability today, which in this global pandemic, in this chaotic politics, in this kind of unrest, in this uncovering of lots of things and injustices, we're very aware of our vulnerabilities. And so I think we're ripe for an honest conversation with God.
How does seeing that the God that we love, that was the way he chose to enter through vulnerability, how does that shape your relationship with him?
Well, I think it you know, we all know this throughout our lives, that we move from like our heads to our hearts in a lot of, like, we understand concepts, but then we are like, oh, that's what that means. And in fact, the way we actually learn about things in the world is really through doing, and then our hearts are changed, and then we go, oh, that's the idea. But I think that we've been, so this is like a total side note, but this is actually what's changing in a lot of like spirituality and the way that we talk about, or actually like even in our spiritual education systems, is that a lot of seminaries are based on this model, which is like, let's start with an idea, and then hopefully that idea changes our hearts, and then we'll be asked to do something. That's not actually how humans learn intuitively. We actually learn by doing stuff, and then we go, oh, that affected me deeply. And then we take time to go, well, what happened there? And we come up with an idea. So let me take that framework and say, we've all, if you've grown up in the church and stuff, you've heard that Jesus is a high priest. And, you know, the Hebrews says, like, the writer of Hebrews spends a lot of time going, Jesus is this high priest who's sympathetic with the weaknesses that are in a human life. And we go, that's cool, that's great. You know, so we start with this idea instead of this like experience. And I think that to then start with the experience of vulnerability, if you're like, you know, I've written a couple books with my friend Justin McRoberts on prayer, and our premise of prayer is, one of them is that the doorway to hear God's voice in your life is through honesty. And that sounds easy, but it's actually incredibly difficult, because we like to project a lot of like strength and overcomingness and stuff, but like to really be honest about like where you're at is where the conversation happens. And I would say like, one of the things that our vulnerability allows us to do is to be really honest. And then in that like vulnerable place, in that like, I don't have it together, I'm really struggling with this, then we can go, well, that's what that writer of Hebrews is saying, that what you feel right now is the doorway to connecting with God. It's not until you get over it, until you can sum up the story in a nice way to share at church in front of everybody else. It's like right here in your messiness, in your vulnerability, in your I don't have it together, is the connection with you and God. And that feeling of vulnerability, which in vulnerability is just defined as taking off your armor. It's making yourself exposed for attack. It starts with like a military thing. It's like letting yourself be open for attack. So letting all our defenses down and letting that vulnerability be the openness that connects us with this idea of this high priest, this incarnate Jesus who totally understands what it's like to be vulnerable. And so then I think now we're in this like really honest and personal and real conversation with God.
And that's pretty much the theme of this honest Advent. I love how you just defined vulnerability. Oh,
cue the product.
Yeah, I have to stop speaking because it's speaker view on Zoom. So if I'm talking, people are like, "What is she looking at?" So I have to be quiet.
Oh yeah, got it.
Then you have to talk.
Okay.
Okay. So anyways, okay, so honest Advent, vulnerability, you made me laugh, so I lost my train of thought, and it was a good question. Doggone it. Hold on. It'll come back to me.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's the theme of that book. And I know there's different like devotionals, prayers.
You were saying that the theme is vulnerability, like viewing the incarnation.
Yes, and I liked your definition. I want you to define Advent, and then I want you to share one of the meditations or prayers, or just maybe something you've received feedback from someone that has read the whole book and they've said, this day or this one was transforming for me.
Yeah. So Advent is invented, meaning like if that's not good or bad, it's an invented structure as our calendar year is and stuff like that. So Advent is the 4 Sundays leading up till Christmas to go, let's spend time imagining like this coming, like Advent in Latin just means coming. So like God is going to incarnate into our midst. What is it like to live with that anticipation? So that's how a lot of like Advent is like meant to be celebrated or participated in. It's just like this longing for the thing that you want to see, and spending that time in that longing and what it's doing to you. It's modeled after like what pregnancy is, which is like you have this thing that you see signs of happening, but you haven't quite seen it, and then it like comes out and you're like, oh, there it is. So that is kind of what Advent is. And if you grew up Protestant or you're in a Protestant church, like maybe now it's trendy, or maybe there's some Advent coming around, but mostly it's been in like Catholic or Orthodox traditions. It was kind of ignored for a while. But it's great. I think if I can be honest, I think some of the things that have troubled me about Advent and even Lent and Easter is that, Christmas and Easter are like the big celebration times for churches. And it's all this kind of like, Christmas is like, and now Jesus is here. And then you're like, great. I still don't see anything, and then Easter is like, and Jesus is alive. And you're like, great. Where? Like there isn't, let's be honest, there's like an aspect of our spirituality that we are dealing with the Spirit of God, which is invisible. And so the places that God offers us a way of witnessing or experiencing God is through like our soul, like this kind of hidden part of us, and in the actual like application of these commandments or ways of living that were offered. And I talk about this in the book. It's like there really is no like visible evidence of God, meaning like, creation is, but like meaning like you can't go to a mountaintop and be like, there's God, and there's like a floating golden man being like, hi, I'm God. That's not, but like Jesus best kind of gives a framework for it. He says, when these people, like, he's talking to these people and he's like, well, when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. And the people are like, we never saw you. What do you mean? And he goes, oh, when you did it to the least of these, you were doing it to me. He's inferring, he's like, in the action of caring and love, is that's when this like doorway to this larger reality opens up. Like it's actually in the living it that we experience this divine truth. And so I think Advent or any of these kind of liturgical movements are really to offer us a way of like kind of practicing it. So then we see that doorway opening up a bit more. That's how I've come to kind of understand these practices. I can share so this book is comprised of like 25 meditations. My intent was like, hey, starting December 1st, you could just do one every day. A lot of them are pretty short, maybe a couple pages. There's a few that are like 4 pages. They're around like 1,000 words each. But here's a short one. This is one of my favorite ones. It's actually the cover of the book, which is this like early pregnancy Mary. People are like, she doesn't look very pregnant. I'm like, you don't immediately blow up like in a balloon. That's just like that's just like the last few weeks of pregnancy. For a while, it just looks like you ate too much nachos.
Easy.
Okay.
Easy.
Yeah, you're just like, all right, what's going on? That's like I have a few rules in my life. One is never, ever, 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 ever guess, ever, if somebody's pregnant. Even if it's like so obvious, even if they're at a hospital in a birthing room, still go, I don't know, something happening to you? Just never, ever guess. Okay. So this chapter is called Assumptions. This is fun because we have a lot of assumptions about what Christmas is. Okay, so here we go. It is assumed that Mary rode on a donkey, but the Bible doesn't say she did. It's assumed there was an innkeeper, but it doesn't mention one anywhere. It's assumed there were 3 magi, but it doesn't give a number of those who showed up. It's assumed there was a star overhead when Jesus was born, but it doesn't say that either. It's assumed that Jesus was born in a stable, but all it says is he was laid in a manger, and that could have been any number of places. Christmas comes with many assumptions, some helpful, some not so much. Spirituality also comes with many assumptions, and the ones that fail us are the ones that we make up. Well, take 2. And the ones that fail us are the ones we make about what it's supposed to look like, who is worthy for it to happen to, and what kind of outcome it's supposed to have for us. Assumptions like, you should be more than you are now to be pleasing to God. Your weaknesses are in the way of God's plan for your life. Your lack of religious fervor is a disqualifier for divine participation. You're probably not doing it right. Other spiritual people have something you don't have. Our assumptions hinder our spiritual journey in all kinds of ways, and the antidote to assumption is surprise. The surprise of Christ's incarnation is that it happened in Mary's day as it is happening every day in your lack of resources, your overcrowded lodging, your unlit night sky, your humble surrounding. It's a surprise that life can come from barren places. It's a surprise that meek nobodies partake in divine plans. It's a surprise that messengers are sent all along the hidden journey of life to let you know you are not alone. It's a surprise that you will be given everything you need to accomplish what you've been asked to do. It's a surprise that nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing can separate you from love. Your assumptions believe there must be something that can, but surprise, nothing can. And then there's like a little blessing at the end of each one. It says, may you thank God with joyful surprise at how much you have assumed incorrectly. So that's on assumptions.
Wow, this is my new favorite way to do interviews, is just make the author read a chapter of the book.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Great.
Scott, thank you so much. The book is Honest Advent. We'll link up to it in our show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad I had some groovy background music and some tropical birds to join me in this interview.